Hi, I'm John DeArmond with the Coquille Valley Sword Group, and today we're going to be beginning a new video series looking at one of the lesser known, at least here in the West, written works of Musashi called the Heiho Sanjugo Kajo. The name Heiho Sanjugo Kajo means Heiho is the modern way of saying Hyoho, which is strategy, of course. San is 3, Ju is 10, so 3 tens is 30. Go is 5, so 35. And Kajo is article, or articles, right? So the 35 articles of strategy. We are going to look at this because, not only because it's not a text that is widely known of or widely available to us here in the West, but also because as a written guide, it is generally held in greater esteem in both of Musashi's existent schools, Hyoho Niterichiryu and Enmei-ryu. And the reason for this may not appear clear at first, so don't really trouble yourself by thinking, oh, well, why is this one more important than this? Instead, just kind of open yourself and take the material in as it is. Now, the Heiho Sanjugo Kajo was first sort of released to the public as a document that was written in February of 1641, which is about 2 years prior to the writing of the Gorin no Sho. And it was written supposedly as a gift for Hosokawa Tadatoshi, who was the lord of Kumamoto Castle, which is where Musashi had sort of been attached to, not as a retainer per se, but as an advisor, a free agent, if you will. The Hosokawas were good patrons of Musashi, and they really helped him out, especially in his later years. So, with that, there's been a lot of speculation as to if that is accurate at all, because that original copy was lost, and the only copies that had kind of come forward were ones that had been written after that, copies of that. And so it was kind of seen outside of the Ryuha as maybe fake, maybe not an actual historical document. Musashi's later students didn't really help this necessarily, because they tended to add material, but we now have the sort of archaeological evidence that shows that, yes, this was indeed a text that Musashi himself wrote, at least the original 4. And in fact, the true date of the original article is much older than the copy that Musashi made for the Hosokawa. Now, all the evidence points to the initial copy being made around 1631, 10 years prior than the believed date, as a gift for his third adopted son, Takemura Yoeman. And it was given as part of Enmei-ryu, right? I don't know if we've gone over this before, but the first sort of school that Musashi established was Enmei-ryu, a clear circle, a perfect circle school. And it's still alive today, and it's when we get into the Nito Seho, the two-sword work, we will briefly demonstrate some of the kata for Enmei-ryu, and you can see kind of the evolutionary differences, like how these branches changed once they diverged and went their own kind of way. So the copy that I'm going to be working from is Vaughan Williams' English translation of Tero Machida's article, The Essence of the Sword Fighting Techniques of Miyamoto Musashi. You can find this online as a PDF, freely available. If I can figure out an easy way to, I will put a copy in the description of the video so that you can kind of read through it and go over it itself on your own. Now, the reason I'm using this copy is not simply because it's a good English translation, but because the original author didn't just copy the version that is most widely available in Japan, but instead went around and collected copies of several copies that were made by Musashi students. Because again, we don't have the original that was made for his third adopted son, and we don't have the original that was made for Lord Hosokawa. All we have are copies made of that by people in later generations. And so the author went around, he sort of collated and gathered not only the copies in Inmei Ryu and Heiho Nichiryu, but also a copy that was that is held in the archives of Yagyu Shinkagyu. Interestingly enough, all of the modern versions have 36 articles. Some of them actually have more, but they're usually distinguished by a name denoting the number of articles that they actually have. The only copy in existence that we know of that has actually 35 instead of 36 articles is the Yagyu Shinkagyu copy. So it's kind of an interesting play, you know. The Yagyus get a copy of it, and they study it in case they ever have to fight Heiho, and you know, it's an interesting sort of dynamic, especially since Lord Hosokawa was, I believe he was Menkyo Kaiden in Yagyu Shinkagyu. So there's a lot of cross-fertilization that happens between those two schools. You can see that in their two sword sets. You can see it in our use of tools like the Fukuro Shinai. Both of them share a focus on strategy over technique. And anyway, I'm sort of getting off on a tangent here. The schools are connected and not kind of antagonistically as sort of popular media would portray, right? Moving on. So, that's the copy that we're going to be working from. My plan is to go over a section and then talk about it a little bit and let you guys know what I see in it. Of course, you're feel free that I always leave the comments open. You know, if you have an observation that you think is meaningful, go ahead and share it, right? So, with that, let's begin. We're beginning with the foreword. After many years of practice in my own school, the strategic methods of which I developed through training with two swords, I wish to write down the main points for the first time. It is difficult to explain the individual content with the appropriate words, but I will try to write down the main parts of the continuously trained strategical techniques, the path of the sword, the attitude of the spirit, and other knowledge in the order in which they come to mind. So, this type of intro is, you know, very sort of standard, especially in Musashi's writings. It's clear, it's methodical, it doesn't really have a lot of fat on it. So, what does he let us know, first off? He says, hey, what's the purpose of this thing? I am going to pass on the strategic methods of my school, at least the main points. right? So once again, we see that focus on strategy over technique of Heiho over Waza, right? So where did these techniques come from? They came from him using two swords. While people are often very quick to point out that Musashi didn't actually duel a lot with using both swords in tandem, um, the people who say this tend to do so, at least this is my observation, as though to either discredit the idea of using two swords or to discredit the idea that he used two swords at all. Both of these kind of lack a point, right? It's just people trying to be nitpicky. And it's actually it's pretty silly when you look at it. I mean, for one, it's obvious that Musashi trained with two swords, right? He not only is it still existent in the kata in both of his schools, but he often refers to his method as Nito Ryu, as the school of two swords, being developed from two swords, and we have his own written account. So that's, of course, it's like I said, it's just people being nitpicky. Don't worry about it. The next thing that this introduction lets us know is it basically says, hey, it's difficult to talk about the work specifically with words, right? And this is a common theme in Hyoho and in Musashi's writing, and in a lot of martial writings, actually. There's this idea that if your work can be perfectly transmitted by just the written word, then it's not very sophisticated, in that it doesn't rely on any kind of interaction with the other person and working with them rather than on them. This might be too subtle a point. Anyway. So, we know that what he's giving us is kind of this vague, nebulous idea. Here is what I'm trying to say to you, but words alone are not enough. And this idea of direct communication, right? Not with words, but through on-body contact, through the feel, through experiencing the work, person on person. That's how you can really sort of start to understand it. So, from there, he lists the main kinds of things that he's looking to specifically talk about, right? Strategic techniques, the path of the sword, the attitude of the spirit, and whatever happens to come to his mind, right? Strategic techniques are just, hey, if the idea is to seize the initiative, I'm going to show you that in the strategic technique Sasen, right? From which you can apply it into other techniques, other technical work, other waza, right? The path of the sword, right? And that's just, how does the sword travel? Where is it moving to and from? And when we get specific examples, it'll be easier to explain why that's important, because the initial idea is that it's important to know where the sword is going because there's some super secret angle, right? That there's some super ninja way of throwing the sword, right? Of cutting with the sword that makes all the difference. And that's not the case at all. In fact, it is it's a lot simpler than that, right? But again, we'll wait for a specific example to talk about it more in depth. Attitude of spirit, right? This is a huge part of Hyoho, this internal state that you maintain and I say maintain, but it's not static, right? It's changing. Sometimes you're full on the outside, sometimes you're full on the inside, right? And it has to do both with harmonizing with your opponent and harmonizing with your situation and harmonizing with your state. And even saying it in words like that makes it seem much more complicated than it actually is. But again, we'll look for a specific example to kind of draw out that idea. And then the last, just whatever knowledge that comes to mind, sort of incidental bits, like, hey, you know, you might want to do it this way, right, for whatever reason. So that is the foreword for the Heiho Sanjugo Kajo. In the next video, we'll begin with the next articles. So, as always, if you want to understand this work, you have to pick up a sword and go train.